Sauron, the Deceiver, an entity of immense power. And with that power he forged the One Ring, to whom the greatest of Middle-earth would one day fall. What will your fate be?
What is up, all you ravishing Rohirrim? It's your resident prismatic wizard back with another video. Today we're going to be jumping into one of my favorite role-playing games of all times, The One Ring. If you've seen any of my other content, you've probably guessed that I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and if you clicked on this video, you probably are too. And what could possibly be better than a role-playing game where you could meet them? Aragorn. Almost every role-playing game that is in the fantasy genre gives some sort of homage to J.R.R. Tolkien's epic world of The Lord of the Rings. But this book by far does it the best and focuses solely on the world of Middle-earth and how you can get characters into that world that you can play with. Not to mention, just look at the cover. Look at this. I'm gonna risk standing up and looking dorky on camera just to show you this cover. Look at that. Let's set aside my personal thoughts about the One Ring role-playing game and dive into the actual mechanics of the game and how you can play it. The One Ring role-playing game is produced by Free League Press, and they've done a lot of other great projects from Dragonbane, Symbaroum. Am I saying that right? Me from the future editing this. If I'm not, just put a little thing on. Okay. Anyway, they've also done the Blade Runner and Alien RPGs that have won a ton of awards. This book, the core product, is set in the years between the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, kind of this mid-period where the ring is still active and shadows are kind of building in the distance. Moving into the actual mechanics of the game, we're going to take a look at the first thing you look at when you're doing any role-playing game, and that's action resolution. Now, I know what you guys are all wondering. What type of dice do I roll to decide if I do the thing or not? That's the core question of every role-playing game. It's these dice. As you move through your adventures in the One Ring, there are three types of rolls you will be making. Either a skill roll, a combat roll, or a shadow test, based on what your character is currently doing. Whenever you make one of these rolls, you are going to take a d12, known as a feat dice. In addition to this feat die, you are going to be taking multiple success dice to add to whatever roll you make, based on how good you are at that particular roll. Roll these dice, add them all together, and you're trying to add up to above a target number that is predetermined on your character sheet. In the One Ring, you have three abilities. You have your strength, your heart, and your wits. And each of those has a target number associated with it. That target number is 20 minus your attribute for that specific skill. Underneath each of these attributes, there are special skills that you can be proficient in, kind of like in some other role-playing games you might be familiar with. Each rank of proficiency you have in that skill lets you add an additional success dice to your roll made for that skill. Let's run a quick example roll. Say I'm playing Kilindur, a Ranger of the North captain who's leading his people against the forces of darkness. And he's got a 13 in strength with 2 marks on his athletic skill. This is definitely not me trying to be Aragorn. Guys, I promise, it's not me. Okay, fine, it's me trying to be Aragorn, okay? Regardless, I would take 1 feat die and 2 success dice because of my proficiency in that skill, and roll them together, trying to get above a 13. In this case, I rolled an 11 on my feat die and a 2 and a 6 on my success dice. This all adds up to far more than my target number, which was 13, meaning I got a complete success. Now, I know some of you are wondering, Prismatic Wizard, how do I get those juicy crits? I want to know how I crit in this game. But don't worry, I got you. And this game has 2 different ways that you can crit because you are using 2 different types of dice every time you roll. The first way is by rolling a 12 on your d12. This, for these dice, is marked with a Gandalf rune. This is an automatic success no matter what your target number was. The second way you crit is only important if you actually succeed on the roll. If you do, this determines the degree of success you achieve. And that is if you've rolled 6s on your success dice. This lets you get more than you wanted from the roll to begin with, or even achieve a magical success. One last thing before we move on to how to make a character is the advantage system in this game, called favored or ill-favored. If you have a favored roll, say you are attacking someone from the high ground, like in the Revenge of the Sith.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
You underestimate my power!
Don't try it.
Anyway, what favored or ill-favored basically means is you take 2 feat dice instead of 1 and roll them together. If the roll is favored, you take the higher of the 2 numbers. If it's ill-favored, you take the lower of the 2 numbers. You guys are probably tracking that the more success dice you have, the better chances you have of completing the roll. And the One Ring has a way to give you more success dice on rolls that are really pivotal, and this is called the hope system. Basically, you have a number of points that you can expend to add additional success dice to a specific roll. Alright, let's jump into character creation. The One Ring character sheet has quite a bit going on it, but luckily we have a page in this book that details every single thing going on here. It's a very robust game, and I'm not going to be able to cover it all, but if you're looking through, this explains it perfectly. The biggest choice you're going to be making when creating your One Ring character is going to be your heroic culture. This is basically the people group that your character comes from that defines who they are. For Aragorn, this is the Rangers of the North. For Gimli, this would be the Dwarves of Durin. The heroic cultures that this book lays out are the Bardings, the Dwarves of Durin, the Elves of Lindon, the Hobbits of the Shire, the Men of Bree, and the Rangers of the North. Your heroic culture gives you your attributes, stats, skills, and combat proficiencies. Basically everything that makes your character who they are. The next decision you're going to make is your calling. This is basically your role that you play in the party. They have a bunch of different callings here, but what your calling gives you is a couple of special skills and some new features, but it also gives you something called a shadow path, and I really enjoy this mechanic. As you Lord of the Rings fans probably already know, Tolkien plays a lot with corruption in his stories, and the lure of power. And the One Ring does a great job of capturing the essence of this with these shadow paths. The basic idea of a shadow path is it is the way that Sauron and the forces of darkness might try to manipulate your character into falling into corruption. For someone like a captain, the leader of the group, the shadow path is the lure of power. If you are given more and more power, it is very easily for the enemy and Sauron to weave their way in and corrupt you from the inside. One other way you get to personalize your character in the One Ring is through virtues, and these are kind of like extra features you can get along your journeys. They go from anything like confidence, which you can raise your hope, to hardiness, where you can raise your endurance. There are some default options as well as cultural specific ones, giving you special skills that only dwarves would have. The next question you're probably wondering is, how do I fight people? I mean, I wouldn't know, because, I never have to fight people. I'm a wizard, and I've got a guard dragon, obviously. But the book knows how to fight people. The book knows. The One Ring has a unique combat style because they don't focus on initiative rolls to keep everything in order. They focus on stances, basically what position you're taking up in a battle. The 4 basic stances are the forward stance, the open stance, the defensive stance, and the rearward stance. And they're all in this nice little box up here for my eyes, so I can see them. For my aging eyes. I read too many books. Anyway, at the beginning of combat, if your DM brings out a battle map or is describing it in Theater of the Mind, you decide where each of your players is, as well as choosing a stance for them. If you're in a forward stance, an open stance, or a defensive stance, these are close combat stances. Basically, you up in the actual fray and battle. Each of the different stances has its own benefits and drawbacks. Say if you are in a forward stance, you are a more aggressive combatant and are taking risks that might put you in danger. This gives you an additional success dice to every one of your attacks. However, it means that every attack coming in against you also gets an additional dice to it. Once everyone has decided their stances, it's time to begin the actual combat. Opening volleys are exchanged. This is basically people shooting arrows back and forth as the distance between fighters is closed. The GM gets to decide how many opening volleys are fired, if any, and in this point, any characters with ranged weapons can exchange blows. Once the opening volleys are exchanged, we can move into close combat rounds. This is basically the nitty-gritty of the fight. Each player, based on their stance, gets to go in a specific order, and the player characters always go first and complete all of their actions before the enemies go. Combat flows from the people in the forward stance through the open defensive to the rearward stance, and each character gets to perform 2 actions, a main action and a secondary action. Main actions are generally something like attacking, intimidating a foe, inspiring an ally, or something in that such. Secondary actions is kind of like a bonus action, or free action in something like D&D, taking off a helmet, looking for an ally on the battlefield, or something to that extent. After the player's heroic turn, then the enemy gets to go, responding to what they did in a very cinematic combat style. That wraps up the combat portion of the One Ring's mechanics, but they also have some very interesting mechanics for holding council and journeying. For the council mechanics, you can make them as roleplay heavy or light as you like. However, there is a set mechanic for if you actually gain the assistance of whatever NPC you are talking to. Basically, your party comes together with their goals for how the council goes. What aid they're asking for. Are they asking for the elven legions to come aid them in their battle? Or are they simply asking for a night of respite in Linden? Once the difficulty is set, the party elects a spokesperson to lead the interaction. This spokesperson gets to make certain skill rolls to further the conversation in their advantage. The whole party gets to pitch in with different skills and abilities until you finally reach the end of the council, in which all the successes and failures are added up to see if you beat the difficulty you had set at the beginning. In a very similar way to the council mechanics, journey mechanics give you a set way to make a journey. Basically, you have your game master draw out a map for you, and the players get to decide how they move through the environment. If you're a game master hearing this and are like, oh no, my art skills are not up to par, don't worry, mine aren't either. And luckily, the One Ring provides a bunch of awesome maps in the back of the book just for you. Throughout the journey, the players are going to build up fatigue points. These basically detriments to their stats and abilities that come from any long journey. At the end of the trip, players can make one final roll to essentially reduce this amount of fatigue, getting bonuses to this if they're using mounts or special equipment. The final mechanic we're going to talk about here is the fellowship phase. This is essentially the long, broad strokes of time that pass in any Lord of the Rings book. This is a kind of downtime mechanic. A fellowship phase can be easily mapped out by deciding how long you want your fellowship phase to be, what the duration, timeline-wise, it will be, where you want it to be, normally a safe haven or something like that. Then you get to perform any updates you get, basically using experience points to improve your abilities and other things like that. Finally, you get to decide if you are doing any undertakings. This might be something like rallying troops, amassing a new following, or forging a new weapon. There are more mechanics that let you dive into the actual undertakings you are doing, but we're not going to be able to cover those here. The rest of the book goes into detail for the lore master about specific locations in Middle-earth, as well as giving you a pre-made adventure. It also has a bunch of statistics for everything from brigands to mountain trolls, even to ring wraiths. Alright everyone, that is the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big old thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. And subscribe for some more Prismatic Wizard shenanigans. If you liked the One Ring role-playing game, but don't have the money to fork over for a new RPG right now, go ahead and check out my video I made on Ironsworn, a completely free role-playing game with a gritty fantasy twist. As always, check out some other videos on the channel, and don't forget to keep it chromatic.